Federal Executive Council approves issuance of Euro bonds and other securities from the international capital market.
Supreme Court orders enforcement of oil revenue share to Nigeria.
Federal government restates commitment to prioritize the welfare of workers for better performance.
On Good Morning Nigeria today, our focus is on the World Bank and the management of the Nigerian economy.
Nigeria is one of the 189 member nations of the World Bank, from which all the countries do receive financial advice and support.
That's right, Joy. I mean, the World Bank, also known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as you said, does provide from time to time pieces of advice as well as long-term financial support. But the pieces of advice or suggestions are often aimed at improving the socio-economic development of the member nations.
That's right, Kingsley. Now, apart from technical support and advice, the World Bank also provides facilities to member nations to drive their economic development agenda.
That's right. Well, it's in the course of discharging these responsibilities to its members that the World Bank some years ago advised Nigeria and indeed other African countries to invest more in infrastructure, such as roads, rail, and energy, just to mention a few, as against other needs, particularly health and education.
Now, Nigeria, just like other African countries, took the advice in good faith and implemented, which perhaps is partly responsible for where the country is in terms of development today.
Well, Joy, just last week, the World Bank President Jim Yong Kim at the IMF and World Bank Group annual meetings in Bali, Indonesia, they'd say something, and this was particularly significant. According to him, Nigeria is one of the most important countries, not only in Africa, but in the world. And so we feel that it will be extremely important for Nigeria to really go on a different level altogether in terms of their commitment to invest in human capital. I think that the World Bank has to take some responsibility for having emphasized hard infrastructure, such as roads, rail, and energy, for a very long time, and I think that changed 20 years ago. That was according to the World Bank president.
It's interesting that the World Bank president is owning up and saying this. So in view of this development, what should Nigeria do? Is it right to take advice from international organizations, hook, line, and sinker? What do we do now to remedy the situation going forward? This is our focus on Good Morning Nigeria. I am Joy Usiagu. You're welcome to the program.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Joy in also welcoming you to this edition of the program, reaching you as always live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. In addition to the questions my colleague has already raised, of course, we'll be taking a look at other perspectives. Why is it that at a time now that Nigeria is seeking to focus on infrastructural development, that we're now beginning to hear that, oh, no, when we asked you to, yes, on human capital development. When they asked us to focus on infrastructural development, what were the policy outcomes? Did we have superb infrastructure during those years? So what is it that we need to do right? How do we balance our policy options with regard to economic management and development? So that will be in our conversation segment. Plus, of course, before then, we have our regular companions, namely newspaper review, business, sports, foreign, and others. In the meantime, let's take the highlights of the morning news. And here is Stella Inamiti with the highlights.
Good morning, Joy and Kingsley. Here is the morning news. The Federal Executive Council has approved the issuance of Eurobonds and other securities from the international capital market, valued at $2.9 billion. Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed, who announced this while briefing journalists after a Federal Executive meeting, said another $60 million facility has also been approved for the Livelihood Improvement Family Enterprise Project in the Niger Delta region.
This is to fund capital projects in the 2018 budget. We also got approval to raise the sum of $82.54 million to bridge the shortfall of the 500 million euro bond that matured on the 12th of July 2018.
A three-day International Shiros Forum is underway in Monrovia, Liberia. The conference is bringing together former female leaders in Africa, such as former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, former President of Malawi, Joyce Banda, and former Vice President of Zimbabwe, Joyce Mujuru. Nigeria's Vice President, Yemi Osinbajo, and host President George Weah, along with other dignitaries, were honored for their support for women's advancement. Discussion at the forum is on why female representation in political leadership is reducing and what can be done to advance participation in leadership.
As a wake-up call to women leaders, state actors, and civil society.
The load is not lighter when you do it yourselves. We are there to lift the load together. It is my sincere hope that our African governments will put more focus and investment in educating girls.
To reach for your life dreams, rise up to leadership. Do not limit yourself. You can be anything you want to be.
And so the only way we can achieve our collective goal is to work together in unison.
When women and girls are free to reach their full potentials, to get education and to earn equal pay, and to aspire and attain the highest political positions, not once in a while, but all the time, then the full potential of the other half of the population of the world will be unleashed.
I wish to declare myself as Liberian female chief.
The Senate at Wednesday's plenary has approved the request for President Muhammadu Buhari for external capital to raise $2.7 billion United States dollars from the international capital market as approved in the 2018 budget.
That the Senate do approve the issuance of $82.54 million to refinance the balance of the 500 million matured euro bond in the international capital market.
Particularly to fund the capital aspect of the 2018 appropriation.
All the committees are going to carry oversight to ensure that these previous loans have been properly utilized.
In the meantime, the bicameral legislature held crucial meetings with the executive to sort out some key pressing issues.
The purpose, Mr. Speaker, of this bill, which is the National Payment Systems Management Bill, include ensuring nationally utilized and internationally recognized payment system, which encompasses the total payment process from issuance of instructions to final settlement.
It's a known fact that the financial inclusion in Nigeria is at a dismally very low ratio,
and IPAS will surely give the legal framework and regulatory framework that is required and the backing that CBN require.
Nigeria is now on the verge of earning higher oil revenue following a judgment of the Supreme Court, which has now ordered the enforcement of a law that grants more oil revenue share to Nigeria. In a landmark judgment by a panel of justices led by the Chief Justice of Nigeria, the federal government is now to enforce Section 16, subsection 1 of the Deep Offshore and Inland Basin Production Sharing Contract.
Essentially, the oil price had overshot $20 a barrel
ever before even the first oil was discovered, and went on to $120 a barrel for many years. And the players in the industry, both in the NNPC and their partner oil companies, had failed to adjust these prices and additional revenue to meet with the expectations of the law under which they contracted to operate. And it is the discovery of these lapses which has essentially fleeced Nigeria of more than 10 or even 50 times the revenue it ought to have gotten from its oil wealth.
It is a known fact that for government to implement its policies and programs, public servants must be involved, as they are the tool that will drive the process. Minister of Labour and Employment, and in a message to the National Negotiating Council 2018 separate meetings, said government is ready to prioritize the welfare of its workforce for better performance.
2017 to 2020 Federal Civil Service Strategy and Implementation Plan. This plan is targeted at transforming and repositioning the Federal Civil Service to a modern public service organization that provides world-class service for sustainable national development.
I therefore enjoin the Council to sustain the cordial relationship between government and labor for the overall benefit of civil servants and in the interest of the service.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed says the Executive Order 6 is not in any way a plot to witch-hunt political opponents, as it is being rumored. The minister made this clarification while responding to questions shortly after addressing an audience in Chatham House, London.
Since coming into office, the administration of President Muhammadu Buhari has embarked on unprecedented renewal of the nation's infrastructure, investing an unprecedented 2.7 trillion naira, about $7.5 billion, on roads, rails, power, and other similar projects. But it's not enough to embark on these projects. It is important to let the public know the extent and spread of such projects to foster a sense of national unity.
And that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Joy and Kingsley after this break.
Unemployment, notably youth unemployment, features strongly in our party's manifesto. We intend to attack the problem frontally through revival of agriculture.
The 30K is going a long way. Actually, I bought an acre of land for 60K like 2012, and presently I have a cassava farm and a yam farm.
Reorganized, trained, and fully equipped, we are the new improved Nigeria Police Force. We fight crime, we bust syndicates. Whatever the crime, wherever the hideout, the Nigeria Police Force will get you busted. Stop kidnapping, armed robbery, murder, pipeline vandalism, and other criminal activities. Be productive. Be security conscious. Join the police force to secure your life and property. This message is from the Nigeria Police Force Public Relations Department.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action.
You in the air-conditioned office with the itchy throat. Strepsils. Girl in the spotlight with the raspy throat. Strepsils. You in the pollution. Yes, you. Dry throat. Strepsils. And in the downpour with the scratchy throat. Take Strepsils. Strepsils, with its soothing medicinal ingredients, will heal the harm done to your throat from external factors. Strepsils! Strepsils! Strepsils, for a dry, itchy, raspy, scratchy throat.
Fake news which is shared for malicious purposes is a danger to our peace and security in Nigeria. Misinformation as fake news is a serious threat to our hard-earned democracy and promotes hatred and misunderstanding between our communities. We are all responsible for stopping the spread of fake news in its tracks. So, always check the source and credibility of any news item. Say no to fake news. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information.
The time has come again when we all gather at the Unity Forum to celebrate the uniqueness of our cultural diversity and showcase the beauty of our cultural creativity and ingenuity. It's the National Festival of Arts and Culture, NAFEST, in the Garden City of Port Harcourt, Rivers State. Come, let's celebrate our culture and heritage. Hold it 20th to 27th October 2018. Special features, dance drama, traditional wrestling, indigenous textiles and cuisine, arts and crafts exhibition, entrepreneurship roundtable, skills acquisition, and many more. 20th to 27th October 2018. Be a part of history. It's NAFEST Rivers 2018, the festival that unites the nation. Otumba Olusegun Runshewe, DG National Council.
To the outer framers, the hat tippers, the fringe goers, you don't need to hide anymore. Try Dettol Even Tone. It cleans and helps to reduce the appearance of blemishes caused by oil, dirt and germs, giving your skin a healthy feel for an even better you. Dettol, be 100% sure.
Dettol soap is now also available for 100 Naira only.
All right, thanks for staying with us. We'll go to our business desk for stories trending there now.
Experts have applauded the impact of President Muhammadu Buhari's administration on human capital development, which they say have created some sort of stability on the nation's workforce, especially with the successes recorded by the social intervention programs. According to Dr. Ono, Nigeria has an astronomical growth in its workforce, hence the need to engage the teeming population in economically viable ventures that impact directly on the populace.
Directly or indirectly, skilled and unskilled workers are being engaged, and if one person is engaged, it's a leverage to the family the person comes from, the village, the local government, and it becomes a network that will help the nation as an economic nation.
The Central Bank of Nigeria has disclosed that as at August 20th, 2018, the total amount released under the Commercial Agriculture Credit Scheme to participating banks for disbursement since the inception of the scheme is 615.43 billion naira. The fund was for a total of 568 projects. In addition, a total of 499.22 million naira was guaranteed to 4,172 farmers under the Agricultural Credit Guarantee Scheme in August 2018. The amount represented a respective increase of 32.9% and 7.8% above the levels at the end of July 2018 and the corresponding period
of 2017. The CBN disclosed this in its monthly report for August 2018. Subsectoral analysis showed that food crop obtained the largest share of 318.5 million naira, which is 63.8%, guaranteed to 3,345 beneficiaries. Livestock got 63.3 million, guaranteed to 242 beneficiaries, while fisheries subsector received 62.92 million naira, guaranteed to 272 beneficiaries. Cash crop also got 40.5 million naira, guaranteed to 245 beneficiaries. Next is a graphic representation of closing figures at the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And that's business news for now. I'm Chimobi Walter Naji.
All right, thank you very much for the business package. Next for us now, we'll take a look at some of the stories in some of today's newspapers. All right, Bayo Atebi, newspaper reviewer, is right here with us in the studios for today's session. Bayo, morning and welcome.
Thank you, Kinsley. Good morning. Good morning, Joy. Good morning, Nigeria.
All right, let's begin with you, Joy.
All right, let's start by taking a look at the stories trending on the front page of the Daily Sun newspaper. Besides the nameplate is a story. EFCC unveils buildings linked to ex-governor Fayose. It comes with one rider. Former Ekiti governor refuses to answer questions, declines administrative bail. You can get details of that story on page 4. And a little bit down below the picture story there, anger in Senate. PDP, APC senators clash over sitting arrangement. More of it on page 6, and beside it is another story. Senate orders suspension of ATM, other charges, summons CBN governor.
Okay, let's take a look also at the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper. Daily Trust newspaper, just below the nameplate, you have the headline, FEC, that's the Federal Executive Council, adopts no work, no pay principle. And NLC false decision. That's on page 3. Bedlam in Senate over sitting arrangements. Page 10. And 2018 budget as a kicker, federal government approves $2.9 billion Euro bond. That's page 5. Lead story is on the 2019 elections, and it says 8 parties submit presidential and National Assembly candidates. That's according to INEC, with the rider APC, PDP, and others strategize as deadline ends today. Deadline ends today. That's Printer's Devil leaping out of that rider there. And then you have a photograph on the front page from Jos. It says, missing general, army parades 13 suspects. And right at the foot of the front page, again, it says, gunmen killed 2 policemen in Kaduna. And Senate asks CBN to suspend ATM maintenance charges. That's page 17. And police nabbed 8 suspects with 11 human skulls in Kwara. Let's take those stories first before we get on with
where do we start from? So many stories now. Well, let's start with the white paper that is generating arguments between the Ministry of Labour and Employment and the trade unions. The Federal Executive Council has approved a report from the technical report instituted by the Ministry of Labour and Employment in April 2016. From henceforth, employers who lock out workers will pay them for the period they didn't they didn't work. However, conversely, no work, no pay rule should also apply by employers in cases of industrial action. Government employers who are elected into executive of labor unions will serve only for 2 terms and no more. There is also a restriction on private practice. For medical personnel, they now have a 7-year period for residency training. If you don't pass, you have to quit. You have to pass residency. There will be no extension for residency. For private practice, medical personnel as well as teachers who operate private schools are to be prohibited. The outcome of this is the technical committee report on the white paper which the Federal Executive Council has approved. However, Labour has reacted immediately. Labour says that this will not stop union from embarking on strike when they feel it is necessary. They say the white paper will not stop Labour because the right to strike, the right to picket, the right to walk to rule, the right to protest, and the right to peaceful assembly are all inherent in the right of that differentiates a worker from a slave. However, they say they also put in their own. Where collective bargain are breached, workers too will apply no pay, no work. That is about the white paper. However, the reported uproar in the Senate ensued from a point of order that was raised by Senator Basi Akpan. He was raising a point of order on an issue, and then Senator Goswill Akpabio also raised a point of order. At that point in time, the Senate President declined to recognize him, insisting that he should relocate to a designated seat. At this point in time, the Senate leader alleged that the Senate President was being biased, and that was when all the others along party lines joined in the fray. But it didn't last long, for about 20 minutes, and it was all over. At the end of the day, the Senate had to contend with another motion raised by Senator Olusegun Ashafa, and it centers on the question that the central bank should, as a matter of urgency, stop or suspend automatic teller machines, ATM charges, being charged by commercial banks. At banks now, there are ATM charges, SMS charges, transfer form charges, as well as commission on transfer. So many charges. In fact, I recall a mother who was complaining, was trying to encourage the child to cultivate a habit of saving. And so you opened the savings account with about 10,000. By the time the student went to school and came back on holidays, the child had less than 10,000 in the account, because the deductions from monthly deductions from withholding tax and interest and other charges had reduced the amount from 10,000 to less than 10,000. So the whole idea of encouraging the child to save had been completely pulled out from underneath the child's feet. So there are charges. However, the other day, you recall, Kingsley, we discussed this issue. That's right. And so withholding tax is featuring prominently. Are they remitted to the coffers of government?
Yeah, usually withholding tax will come when your deposit generates interest. So the interest is, the withholding tax is usually on the interest
at the end of the month.
Accrued, you know, on your principal, depending on the tenor. I mean, if it's 7 days, 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, and so on and so forth. I don't think people are quarreling, for instance, with withholding tax.
No.
It's just, and it's a topic that we took on Good Morning Nigeria.
I remember. We did that about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, slightly about a month or so ago. I just said, look, banks have come up with all manner of charges. ATM maintenance, ATM card maintenance charge, you know, it comes on the monthly SMS. And this is a bulk SMS, by the way.
Even for your birthdays, they send you
that messages.
Congratulatory message.
You know, some of these are just nuisance text messages you get from the banks, and you get charged, you know, for those things. So that's part of what we're talking about. I mean, I remember one of the tweets then was saying, look, the ATM card we were talking about, I have already collected it from you, and it's in my pocket. So what are you maintaining in my pocket? If the ATM card is in my pocket.
In fact, there was somebody who came from United Kingdom on the social media, said for all the years he has stayed in United Kingdom, he has never been charged for ATM charges. So he found it very strange when he came home and was asked to pay ATM charges.
That's right. But incidentally, also, I mean, if you have the deposit in an account, depending on the type of account, yes, from time to time, you know, you could get some deductions, but usually very minimal, because the banks will charge you some nominal fee for maintaining your balance with them. So it's not necessarily the case, unless it's an interest yielding account, for instance, to say, look, you have, say, 100,000. Then what is the tenor? What is the interest rate? How much you get less withholding tax? That becomes your new balance if it is rolled over. So that's that. Bayo, there are the other issue from the Federal Executive Council. That's the white paper. It appears that this is perhaps the first time in a long while that we are having a resolution come out of the Federal Executive Council with regard to its decision on matters arising from some report on which the government now has a white paper, and then the government is taking its decision on the white paper. And that becomes a very serious issue. It becomes a policy document, no longer a draft. Now, if the Federal Executive Council has approved it, and coming from Labour, by the way, I mean, this is a matter that is going to be contentious going forward. But the economy, no doubt about that, has bled from all kinds of wildcat strikes. Health workers are on strike, utilities workers are on strike, lecturers are on strike, teachers are on strike. All kinds of persons just, I mean, this is with respect to them sometimes. For just wake up and they issue an ultimatum, and at the end of the ultimatum or a warning strike, then the entire system is paralyzed. We keep negotiating with them, and they are coming back. And the principle of no work, no pay has never been applied. That principle is there in the law. Yes. It's there in the law. So how do you kick it into effect? And NLC is also saying, well, how can you be working and you don't get paid? So these are the kind of issues you find in our labor market, that things are just upside down, but no economy will survive with the kind of way that we have proceeded, with handling labor issues from the part on the part of those who are suppliers of labor and the part of those who are utilizing the services of labor. Right.
Talking about Jaws, 13 suspects have been held at Rukuba Barrack, and they have now been handed over to the police command.
Bios, I'm sorry, let me leap in here, because this is also related, Joy, so that we don't come back to it. Let's take a look at the front page photographs of the Punch newspaper. You see the front page photograph of the Punch newspaper, and it tells you, it says, scenes from pension verification conducted for retired employees of the defunct Nigeria Airways on the premises of Sky Power. Take a look at these photographs. And this is the kind of thing you find from time to time with the way we deal with our senior citizens who served in the past, who have retired, whose gratuities or whose entitlements are not paid to them. That's apparently the sun is burning hot there, and you just have a Samaritan who is holding an umbrella over the gentleman with perhaps a white handkerchief placed on his head. And then look at the other lady, who is struggling with the aid of a worker to come. And you ask people who are in service would normally ask themselves, is this the kind of experience I want to face? That is the reality, that sometimes these are the social factors that push people, into all kinds of deleterious conduct, including corruption.
Actually, there's a better way of handling this. I remember there is this agency that came in to handle the pension. What they do is they look for the addresses of the senior citizens and follow them up rather than stressing them to come out, particularly those who are facing challenges of incapacitation. They visit them in their home to do their verification, not force all of them to come to this kind of
But the
parade.
question is, how far have they gone with that? Who is holding them accountable, talking about the agency now? Yes. So these are issues that we must look into. All right, let's move on now. We're moving to the Leadership newspaper. For the main headlines there, Senate approves President Muhammadu Buhari's 2.786 billion loan request. You can get the full story on page 4. And it comes with a couple of riders. Suspend ATM card maintenance charges. We just talked about that. Akpabio demands Saraki's resignation. And federal government okays 2.9 billion naira euro bond to fund 2018 budget. No threat to 2019 polls, INEC insists. Federal government has invested 2.7 trillion naira on infrastructure. That comment is attributed to the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, and the story is on page 25 in greater details. You can also see the photograph of the Minister of Information and Culture at Chatham House, London, where he is to brief a couple of journalists and some policy makers. Police arrest 8 suspects with skulls. You can get details of that story on page 11. And federal government approves white paper to stem industrial disputes. Army parades 13 suspects over missing generals. The story is on page 6.
Yes, that was the story I was referring to earlier on. However, the 13 suspects include a woman. And you recall that when soldiers first went to Duradu Pond, women, about 500 of them, attempted to restrain them, to stop them from accessing the pond. They believed that if anybody disturbs the peace of the pond, it had the consequence of affecting their male sons and their husbands, and death will eventually visit them. The woman leader is among the 13 suspects, and they have been handed over to the Plateau State Police Command for continuing investigation and possible prosecution. The persons have information about how the general's car was pushed into the pond, and they are insisting that they should provide information about the persons who were involved.
But Bayo, for the benefit of our viewers, before I say what I'm about to say, just repeat the line again about the woman who was arrested along with other suspects in Jos with regard to the missing general.
Yes.
Just recast it.
Well, the woman was the leader of the about 500 women who came demonstrating, some of them half naked, saying that Duradu pond should not, the peace of the pond should not be disturbed because it has a mythical implication for them. Their husbands and sons in that area would consequently die if the peace of the pond was. Apparently, the soldiers were suspicious, and eventually their suspicion was proved when eventually they were able to retrieve several vehicles from that pond.
That's right. And then we remember on Good Morning Nigeria, what it say, is the pond the equivalent of a Bermuda Triangle? But what is the environment like? Can vehicles veer off the road and then leap into the pond? Or, was there something that was always happening in and around the vicinity that after it happens, then vehicles get pushed into the pond? I think those are very significant questions to address. Bayo, let's take a few stories from the Punch newspaper. We're already taking that very briefly above the nameplate of Punch. Release seized Parry Club refund. Benue Speaker begs federal government. And Obasanjo article, Catholic Secretariat says Kuka's reconciliatory effort hijacked and politicized. Electoral bill, card reader splits reps. And we come to an earpiece there beside the nameplate. External reserves dropped by $1 billion in 13 days. Lead story says EFCC obtains court order to detain Fayose for 2 weeks. Charge ex-governor to court, PDP tells EFCC.
All right, Kingsley, before we go to Bayo, let's take a look at our editorial for today, and it's taken from the Daily Sun. It's titled, Checking the Naira Abuse. In its renewed effort to stop the hawking and abuse of the national currency, that is the Naira, and rid the economy of dirty currency notes in circulation, the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has mapped out measures that will ring in offenders with sanctions such as imprisonment, fine, and both. The campaign to rid the economy of dirty Naira notes has already begun with direct disbursement of new banknotes to marketers, merchants, shopping malls, supermarkets, toll gates across some states in the country. Now, inculcating this new culture of responsibility must go together with making sure that clean Naira notes of all denomination notes are readily available for economic activities. Lower denomination notes facilitate modern business economy, attract more customers, and lead to financial inclusion. Bayo.
Yeah, because before we go to the editorial, let's quickly look at what INEC is saying. INEC is saying that its timetable, what is published January 9th for the 2019 election, has reached its third stage, and that third stage is collation of candidates' names. They say that so far, they attended 89 primaries of political parties. However, the closing date is today, and so far, only about 8 political parties have submitted the names of their presidential and National Assembly candidates as required by law. They have less than 24 hours to do that now, or else they will be in default. Now to the editorial. The concern of the editorial is about the abuse of the Naira, and the abuses are at 2 levels. It is illegal to hawk Naira. You go to the market, you find dirty, mutilated notes in circulation. Several times, there have been charges that central bank has threatened banks that they should be withdrawn for circulation. You recall that a bank official was even jailed for recirculating mutilated notes at Ibadan. And that had prevailed in the currency market for a long time. And also, particularly the little denominations are not available. You always find mutilated notes. However, at public functions, you find crisp, mint new notes being used at celebrations. And you begin to wonder, where do they get them from?
From the banks, of course.
They are not available at the banks. So this is why the central bank itself is concerned. And currently, the central bank says it has a sum of over 1.9 billion in new currency that is going to be in denominations of 200, 150, 20, 10 naira and 5 naira notes to be put in circulation. But meanwhile, they are to adopt what is called a mystery shopper system, watchdog system, and that will entail establishing a mobile court that will entail the police, the judiciary, and banking officials to try persons who are found to be abusing the naira.
All right, Bayo Toyobi, would like to thank you very much. Sometimes just enacting a law or a policy doesn't suffice.
Yes.
Has the central bank, for instance, tried to undertake a sociological study of this phenomenon?
Yes.
And then to see how you can deal with it, yes, rather than from the legal perspective. You go to an O1 party, you know, it's throughout the week or at weekend. How many persons can you arrest? You arrest a few, and then it becomes a different ball game. Soludo tried it when he was governor of central bank, and right there at the presidential villa, there was an event, and then you saw, you know, the flagrant abuse of naira notes. So, what is the sociology or psychology that drives this behavior of Nigerians? Interrogate that first, and then you'll see how it goes. Bayo Toyobi, thanks a lot for being with us.
Thank you too.
See you tomorrow. It's Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, of course, we'll be dealing with the World Bank and its typical advice on how Nigeria should manage our economy, and now how Nigeria should also take a back step.
Hate speech is not a joke. It incites genocide and crimes against humanity. Most of Africa's civil wars are caused by hate speech from one tribe against another. We don't want it here. The Nigerian government stands firm against hate speech.
Under no conditions whatsoever should we tolerate or excuse or justify hate speech or hateful conduct of any kind, especially where such is illegal.
There is no doubt that the resurgent push for separatism, as well as the rising cases of ethnic and religious disharmony, are all traceable to the growing phenomenon of hate speech.
One nation bound in freedom, peace and unity.
Nigeria, one nation, one people.
This is a public service announcement brought to you by NTA.
Can you write? First Entertainment Ideas Concept, in conjunction with National Commission for Museum and Monuments, presents Latin America Motorcycle Association Rediscover Nigeria Tour. Touring Nigerian Museum and Heritage Sites in 13 states and 13 days from the 23rd of October 2018. Chief Host, Honorable Minister for Information, Arts and Culture, Lai Mohammed. For sponsorship details, call Ernest on 090-3456-4388. Godwin 080-3701-5237. Uzoma 080-2980-0549. Selong 080-3225-0153. Umo 080-9440-9719. Lama, touring to rediscover.
Your perfect family is under threat by germs. Infectious diseases are now the world's biggest killer of adults and children.
These infectious diseases are caused by germs. They are everywhere. An average human being comes in contact with over 1 million germs daily in unclean water, dirty surfaces, in the toilets, on cuts and wounds, on your clothes. Germs can cause deadly diseases like typhoid, diarrhea, flu, and cough. To protect your family from germs, use the power of Dettol's One Capsule for surface cleaning in your bathing water, in your laundry water, for first aid to protect your family from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Introducing Dettol Antiseptic Liquid in Sachet for only 40 naira.
Endorsed by the Nigerian Medical Association.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Kehinde suffers from indigestion. His twin Taiyi suffers from heartburn. Sometimes it's the other way around, or both. That's why they use Gaviscon Double Action. It soothes within 3 minutes and lasts for up to 4 hours. For double relief from heartburn and indigestion, Gaviscon Double Action.
Brought us as usual.
As usual. You have no problem. You are welcome, sir.
As usual, yeah? I was
you take that one. You take that one. You don't understand? We want Nigerian homegrown rice. Finish. You don't have? You don't have?
Join the rice revolution today.
No other rice that tastes like Nigerian rice. Are you sorry? That's the Nigerian rice we are talking about. Chocolate made in Nigerian rice. Healthy food. I'm going to bring Mrs. Mobo to come to chocolate rice of made in Nigeria here. And see how it are made.
Correct.
How they are cook it.
Correct.
Homegrown rice are good for your health. It boosts our economy and give employment to our people.
This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
Let's take this excerpt from the remarks of the World Bank president to kickstart our conversation this morning.
We feel that it will be extremely important for Nigeria to really go on a different level altogether in terms of their commitment to investing in human capital. Many African countries are in the red zone. If you see Table 2 in the human capital project, let me put it this way. I think that there is. That the World Bank has to take some responsibility for having emphasized hard infrastructure, roads, rails, energy for a very long time, and that changed 20 years ago. But there has still been the bias that says, we'll invest in hard infrastructure, and then when we grow rich, we'll have enough money to invest in health and education. We're now saying that that's really the wrong approach. That you've got to start investing in your people right now, and not least of which, all the reasons why you need to do that, the rapid change in technology, the fact that many low-skill jobs will be eliminated. Now, nobody's quite sure how long that will take, but a child born today in 20 years, almost certainly, many of the low-skill jobs today will be gone, and the requirement for this child to be able to learn throughout his or her entire life is simply going to get higher. The requirement, the needs are going to get higher and higher. And so this is a very loud and strong message to Africa. Africa needs to invest more in health and education. Luckily, because our IDA, our Fund for the Poorest Countries, is 50% larger than it was 3 years ago, because we have more financing, we do we can provide more support for African countries. But the message here is that heads of state and ministers of finance have to take responsibility. There's so much waiting for the grants to come. You know, we'll wait, and the activists will help us, and they'll tell the donors, we need more money, we need more money. And what's happened is in many African countries, if they don't receive grant-based financing, they just simply don't spend on health and education. So we hope that this is a loud wake-up call for leaders throughout the African continent, and especially in Nigeria.
All right, now that was the president of the World Bank, Jim Young Kim, speaking at the fall annual meetings of the World Bank and the IMF, and the meeting took place in Bali, Indonesia. Now we have guests with us in the studios as well as at network centers to discuss these issues in greater detail. Of course, guests are all familiar faces on Good Morning Nigeria whenever we are discussing economic matters. First with us here in the studios, would like to welcome Professor Ken Ife, is a macroeconomic policy analyst. Professor Ken Ife,
thank you very much.
Good to have you here again.
Thank you.
Okay. We are expecting a guest to join us from our Benin Network studios, but if we get it all clear to go to Benin, of course, we'll connect with him. But from Lagos, we have two guests, Joy.
Yes. Now, to our Lagos Network Center, we have Shuaibu Idris. He is an economic and financial analyst and member of the National Institute, MNI. It's a pleasure to have you join us this morning.
And thanks for having me.
Still in Lagos, we also have one of our regulars, Tilewa Adebajo, who is also a financial analyst. Good to have you join us on the program this morning.
Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Joy.
All right, gentlemen, thanks for being with us on the program this morning. As we said, we're expecting another guest at our Benin Network Center. If he does come, of course, he will join us in this conversation. But let's just begin with guests in Lagos. I mean, with our guests in Abuja here, Professor Ken Ife. You listened to the World Bank president indicate what some persons will say, oh, this is quite revealing or this is quite significant. But for the benefit of our viewers, let's just have a broad understanding of what the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development is all about. That's also what the World Bank is called.
Well, I think it's good that World Bank has confessed that there have been some misallocation of priority. And that's the same way as IMF would have also apologized for the years of structural adjustment where no country has anything to show for all the intervention and the conditionalities. Now, there is truth, great amount of truth in what has been said. There's absolutely no question that investment in Human Development Index is important, especially in the context of the rapid growth of services in Nigeria, which is over 52%. So what is driving the service sector in Nigeria is Human Development Index. You know, it's ICT, you see those sectors that are doing well, Nollywood, all of those sectors in that. So they have potential, and we need to support that. But not at the expense of infrastructure. That's where I would have to disagree with him. Infrastructure, first of all, brings investment into the country.
I'm sorry, Prof. You're already driving into the meat of this conversation. I was saying, you know, let's just, for the benefit of our viewers who may not understand the international institution known as the World Bank, what is the World Bank itself? I mean, of course, you know, one of the Bretton Woods institutions and so on and so forth. That's the explanation that I wanted us to have before delving into the merits or otherwise of what the president said.
Well, it's, as you said correctly, is one of the Bretton Woods institutions. You have IMF, you have World Bank, you have... So those were there to show the light to the whole world and look at things that connect almost everybody, and a lot of them are involved in development activities, and obviously World Bank leads in all these efforts.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Kenny Ife. We'll get back to you in the course of our conversation. Let's go over quickly to our Benin Network Center to introduce our guest there, who is Professor Mike Obadan. He's the chairman, Goldmark Education Academy, Benin City. He's also a non-executive director and member, Monetary Policy Committee, Central Bank of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Very much, Joy.
Let's also continue with you in Benin. Now, before we delve into the meat of this discussion, we're saying let's even take a look at the World Bank. What is the World Bank? What is the relevance of the World Bank to the 189 member countries? Let's start from there.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with you. The World Bank is one of the post-World War international financial institutions set up by the body of world countries to facilitate reconstruction and development after the World War. And specifically, the World Bank has a focus on development of world countries, and over the years it has focused on promoting economic growth and poverty reduction. So as it were, out of the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank can be seen as the development finance component, of the Bretton Woods institutions, unlike the IMF, which focuses on, financial stability, international financial stability, and so on. It's in light of that focus of the World Bank on development that it provides facilities for member countries in the area of infrastructure development, even human capital development. It depends on what it emphasizes in particular countries. Perhaps, as you will discuss later, it tended to focus on hard infrastructure in the case of Nigeria, but elsewhere it has also focused on human capital, education, health, and so on and so forth.
Professor Mike Obadon, thank you very much. We'll come back to you later on. Let's go over to Lagos, where we have two financial experts, Tilewa Adebajo and Shuaibu Idris. Gentlemen, of course, still elaborating on what the World Bank is all about. What are the terms of interaction between the World Bank and its member states? We know that the World Bank also has some other subgroups, such as IFC and MEGA. We'll kick off with that. That's Tilewa and then Shuaibu.
Okay, I think basically, as Professor Mike has said, the World Bank consists of member countries, and it came about arising from the post-World War, Second World War challenges of the world in terms of infrastructure development, particularly in Europe, where we had the Marshall Plan of Action after, the World War. The challenge, and indeed what you asked about, how does the World Bank operate and what is its own relationship with member countries? Basically, there are two or three axioms of relationship. Number one is advisory. The World Bank does advise member countries as to the best policy framework on reconstruction or infrastructural development. Number two, the World Bank also gives loan to member countries, sometimes, at rock bottom prices. These are loans that could take up to 50 years, 25 years to repay, and the interest is near zero. We are talking of single-digit interest, 2%, 3%, at most, 4%. And until last but not the least, is the World Bank does give grant to member countries, countries that are considered as highly indebted or poor nations, such as, say, Niger, Chad, and other countries of the world that are considered extremely poor. They get some form of grant, which is just money targeted to develop a particular section or sector of a country's economy. In the same vein, the IMF, which Kingsley you mentioned, the IMF, the IFC, International Finance Corporation, International Monetary Fund, as well as the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, that is the MIGA, they center on basically 2 or 3 areas. Number one, the IMF centers on monetary policy, exchange rate stability, interest rate stability as it relates between one country and another, while the IFC, which is the International Finance Corporation, is more like the private arm of the World Bank Group, as they are usually called. Usually it gives loans to private sector at a fairly, if you like, commercial interest rate, where the World Bank gives loans, say, at 2-3%, IFC could give you loan at 5 or slightly higher %. And it also, you know, invests, meaning it takes equity stake in companies, whether in Nigeria or in China or in any other parts of the world. That's the little contribution that I have.
All right. Thank you very much, Shuaibu. Let's also get the take of Mr. Tulewa Adebajo, who is seated right beside you there in the studios. Mr. Tulewa, of course, there are examples of entities that have benefited from some of the members of the World Bank Group, including the IFC, for instance, and MIGA. How has this helped the financial services sector?
Well, basically what you have to understand now is the fact that basically the World Bank has more or less finished its mission in Europe, which was its primary focus when it started. So its focus now is on developing countries or emerging markets in Africa, Asia, Latin America. That's where the focus of the World Bank is right now. And with every institution, I think it's important that what these institutions provide is long-term capital that could support infrastructure development and the sort of development that we need, as opposed to commercial banks that don't have the long tenures. So that's the difference. It's a development finance institution. And what they tend to do is, it's for local financial institutions, they tend to on-lend or give them lines. So a lot of Nigerian banks have benefited from lines from the World Bank, from the IFC, for instance, to be able to help them out. And MIGA, as you mentioned, is just an investment guarantee to be able to help investors who want to invest. As you can see in our power sector, for instance, we have this guarantee scheme by the World Bank, which helps investors who want to invest in the Nigerian power sector. By providing a MIGA guarantee, then you help those investors, give them the sort of confidence that they need. But another thing I must say is the fact that it's important that you understand, each country has to understand what its own priorities are. And it is in your own development planning that you decide what your priorities are, and then you now approach the World Bank to borrow the money that you need to use for your projects.
All right. Tulewa Adebajo, I want to thank you very much. We'll come back to you in Lagos. Let's return to Professor Kenny Faye here. We have established the role of the World Bank. We know that right now they're focusing more on developing economies, and it's all about economic development and poverty alleviation. Let's look at Nigeria now. What over the years have we made tremendous progress in terms of our membership of this organization?
Well, I think we have, without a doubt, Nigeria has actually kept its obligation, financial obligation, with most of the international communities. And that's why they're all very actively seeking to support Nigeria. I don't know even ECOWAS, I don't know any country that Nigeria is not actually paying their fair. That cannot be said of most other poor countries, but Nigeria has kept up with our commitment. And I think also that we do need more. I don't think we are taking as much in proportion to our investment as we put in. If you look at the likes of Africa Development Bank, and we could get more resources from these organizations commensurate to what we are putting in. And that has always been raised in many of the bodies that we are member of.
Now you're talking about resources. Let's even look at the benefits to Nigeria. Have we benefited much over the years?
I think we have the capacity to benefit more, and I think we need to ask for more resources and more support because we're entitled to those. Whether we have actually benefited as much from the interventions given, the jury is out on that. We know the traditional support that has been given to basic infrastructures, but we also know where we need far more help, like in privatization of public utilities. We just need to do that. We need more money in that area because government has thousands of businesses that they went into. They shouldn't have any business to do with, and they want to offload those to the private sector. I think that's where we have to get more help.
When you say more, are you referring to the federal government or are you referring to professionals and experts in the field?
The World Bank is expected to support in great part government-related businesses, and then of course they do support private sector engaging with public sector, and that's where the PPP comes in. IMF tends to focus far more on private sector, but still does. But as has been explained by a colleague, there's slight distance between what their focus and their operational modes are.
Okay. Professor Ken Ife, thank you very much. Prof, I'll come back to you, but I want to quote you, and I would like Professor Mike Abadan to also take a cue from this because the question is going to him. Professor Ken Ife did say that what the president of the World Bank said in Bali, Indonesia, was a confession with regard to the policy advice that Nigeria had received from the World Bank. And the president of the World Bank did say that changed 20 years ago. That would be like 1998. That from the World Bank perspective, the emphasis was on infrastructure rather than on human capital development. But let's take a look at our own national condition. At what point was the World Bank, in terms of policy articulation, at what point was the World Bank leading Nigeria down the path of, say, develop your infrastructure, develop your infrastructure? And if Nigeria heeded that advice, what were the outcomes? Is it that suddenly we found ourselves, say, suddenly we have first class or top rate infrastructure countrywide? Did we invest sufficiently in power? Did we modernize our rails? Did we modernize our roads? And indeed, in the 70s, some persons would argue we had petrodollars with which we used in doing some of those things. And then suddenly, the World Bank is now saying, oh, rather than infrastructure, we should have focused on human capital development. Do you have a clear understanding of what the World Bank president is trying to say? Is it describing the Nigerian situation, or there's something else that is underneath?
Thank you very much, Kingsley, for a very great question. It's of interest that at this point in time, the World Bank has come out, World Bank president has come out to say mea culpa on behalf of the bank. I think that's where the problem started. Right from the beginning, when the World Bank began to intervene in Nigeria with development assistance in the form of loans and grants, its focus has been on hard infrastructure, physical infrastructure. For example, the very first loan that the World Bank advanced to Nigeria in 1958 was $28 million for the Nigeria Railway project. And thereafter, the bank's focus was on similar kind of projects in the energy sector, in the transportation sector, port development, SMEs, and so on and so forth. And you see, the bank has been quite dominant among the multilateral institutions of the world in terms of interventions in Nigeria. And its mode of assistance has always been generally loans. Rarely grants are given. And we must understand that it provides loans largely through the hard window. That is through the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which provides loans on market basis. But the bank also has the International Development Association, wing, which provides very soft loans to Nigeria and other developing countries. So what it means that right from the beginning, the bank's perception was that these poor countries, Nigeria included, needed hard infrastructure. But I will say that, yes, hard infrastructure in the context of a poor developing country is very important. But at the same time, we cannot underrate the role of social infrastructure in the form of educational investment, in the form of health investment. So one would have expected that even if the World Bank at that time was very willing to provide loan assistance in the area of hard infrastructure, our governments should have recognized the very critical, very important role of human capital in development, and also on its own mobilize resources, not necessarily from World Bank, to give priority to those sectors of the economy. But it appeared that government was waiting, successive governments were waiting to get assistance before they can invest in education, rather than mobilize funds domestically, aggressively, and then invest in other areas of the economy where foreign assistance or foreign grants were not forthcoming. So as it were, it appears that, like you rightly said, and from the statement of the bank president, that about 20 years ago, they've now realized that Nigeria has been investing through their assistance on hard infrastructure. And even the outcomes of the infrastructure are not infrastructure interventions are not impressive. And then in the area of health and education, the outcomes are even worse. And that implies that there has been a dereliction of responsibility in the area of investing appropriately and adequately in those very areas. If you take education and health, the outcomes are very, very uninspiring. The Human Development Index is a major measure of the human well-being. It has components relating to education, health, and then standard of living. Of course, that means income. And the Human Development Index for Nigeria, as of today, is about 0.252, and it places Nigeria as a low human development country among the countries in the world. And the World Bank's own Human Capital Index, which is a new index that it has evolved, which shows the contribution of education and health to the productivity of future generations, is also very low. Nigeria is at the bottom. So if you look at the various education, health indicators and outcomes, you will find that the country has not been doing well. It suggests that enough investment had not been made in those very sectors, or if investments were made, that such investments were of very poor quality, so that they yielded very, very limited outcomes in terms of improvement of the human person and even growth and development of the economy.
Professor Mike Obada in our Benin Network Center. Now let's go over to Lagos to get the perspective of our guest in the studio. And I'll start with you, Tilewa Adebajo. It is okay to get advice from the World Bank. But again, if you come back to Nigeria, we have professionals, we have financial analysts, we have people who can advise the government in terms of policy. Do we need to take everything we get from the World Bank? How about looking at our own organic situation back home here and do a competitive analysis of the situation before taking whatever we get from international organizations?
Very much. That's a very good question. Charity, they say, begins at home. I don't have any doubt that we have the capacity here to be able to do all we need in terms of our needs assessments, our priority projects and all that. We don't have to take all the advice of the World Bank. The World Bank is just one institution. And Nigeria, don't forget, has made a lot of money from oil revenues over the years. So our oil revenues, the question we need to ask ourselves really is that, yes, while the World Bank president might say all these things, as the professor told us from Benin, the economic professor from Benin told us, the first investment in the railways was in 1958. So what happened in the 70s when we had all this oil money? We stopped investing in our railway infrastructure. So today we don't have rail lines from Lagos to Kano or Kano to Port Harcourt carrying cargo. And we have too many trailers in our country spoiling the roads, and we've not made investment in the rail sector. So is that the fault of the World Bank? The question is no. So what were our own planners doing? These organizations that you talk about, they're just to provide you with a facility. It's a question of what you do with that facility and how you use it. We have the Kainji Dam, which was built in the 70s by the Niger Dams Authority then. That investment in Nigeria today is one of the best investments we've ever made in the power sector, because up till today, that is one dam that is consistently generating power not only for Nigeria, but is also exporting to other parts of the world. So we've had some successes in the infrastructure we've invested in. We need this infrastructure. But the question is that what happened to our universities? At the end of the 1980s, Nigeria had one of the best educational systems in the world. Our doctors, our lawyers were competing with any other country globally. A lot of our doctors now went to America, and they are revered there in America. If you go to America today and you say you're from University College Hospital in Ibadan, any university in America would take you up as a doctor. That's the sort of standards that we've created. Now, what has happened today? Is it the World Bank that caused the lack of investment in all these assets over the years? The question is no. At the end of the day, you have to have your own economic planning model. You have to decide on what you are going to do. The same thing with our health sector. We had a lot of teaching hospitals in this country where people from other African countries also used to come to our teaching hospitals. What is the state of those teaching hospitals today? Everybody is now going abroad to India on medical tourism and other countries that was not the case before in Nigeria. So we cannot begin to blame the World Bank for all these things and a lot of the failures that we've had in terms of our infrastructure development, not only on the health and education side. We let that down. Hard infrastructure is important. All these things are important. But you need to have somebody at the leadership that has a vision for this country to be able to plan to make sure that we do these things properly. Now, our population has been expanding, but the fact is that our economy is not growing as fast as our population expansion, and clearly we're not able to cope with the sort of infrastructure that is going to support our population. So this population we're talking about of 180 million people is fast becoming a liability. If you have 180 million people, then you're supposed to have 180 million people who a significant portion are in the middle class and can able to consume and to be able to give government the taxes and the revenue they need to be able to develop adequate infrastructure. We're not doing that. So my own question is that charity begins at home. The World Bank is an institution. It provides you with loans of various tenors and everything. So you have to decide as a country, what do I need these loans for and how do I need it to develop my country? They can advise you, you can do this, but at the end of the day, like you've said, we have the skills, we have the people, we have the capacity to be able to plan and do what we need to do. The question is that, does the government listen to this advice? And what are our policy people doing? What is our national development policy? What are our policy implications? What is the medium-term development plan for this country? We don't have it. And, you know, if we do not, anybody who does not plan is planning to fail. And that has been the irony of Nigeria. And the population growth is not helping matters because we can no longer cope with the level of population we have in Nigeria. We can't provide for our people anymore. That is where the problem is right now. So let's leave the World Bank out of this, and charity begins at home.
All right, Mr. Tilewa Adebajo, thank you very much for your perspective. But I just would like Shuaibu Idris to respond to some of the aspects I'm about to raise. Tilewa was talking about the fact that, listen, this World Bank would advise you, would make suggestions, but it's the options are actually left to you. Now, what one found, particularly before Nigeria got debt relief under the Obasanjo administration, we saw in the 80s and particularly in the 90s what was then referred to as a constriction of the policy space. Sometimes there were reports, by those who covered the finance and economics bit that the Nigerian national budget often had to be subjected to clearance by the Bretton Woods institution. And this includes that, of course, a collaboration involving the World Bank and the IMF, indicating what policy choices were available to Nigeria. And this was on account of the debt overhang that the country had incurred from the late 70s and then, of course, got aggravated in the 1980s. So did all of this, in a sense, affect, the policy makers at the time as to what options they could take so that in this postmortem, there are lessons to learn going forward?
If you were once a banker, it is always the case when a company or a country owes somebody. Therefore, once you are indebted, you need to be careful. You are indebted to me, and I need to know where are the sources of your revenues, how do you make the money, and how do you intend to spend the money so that I can be guaranteed, repayment of my old loans. You did allude to the fact that in the late 80s and early 90s, because of the debt overhang Nigeria had, obviously almost every issue, every policy Nigeria needs to implement needs to be sanctioned, if you like, approved by the Bretton Woods institution, whether the IMF or the World Bank. So naturally, we were indebted and we needed to pay those loans. Our creditors need to know how and where we are making the money and how we intend to spend the money so that we don't just spend everything we have generated without necessarily having to pay them. That is the major reasons why, as at that time, every policy move of the country needed to be sanctioned by the Bretton Woods institution. However, I like to latch on to what my colleague Tilewa, has said. Really, is there even the need for an apology from the World Bank for, policy prescriptions? If I take us back on the memory lane, from the time of General Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's administration till today, this country have had, a think tank called the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. In the last 30 years, annually, there is an annual, economic summit group presentation done in Abuja, wherein experts suggest to the Federal Republic of Nigeria the policy prescription that the economy needs. To what extent were successive government, taking those recommendations? Again, when you look at our, political history, how many years did we have military rule in this country? What were the budget allocations to defense, to agriculture, to education, to other sectors of the economy during the military regime? If you remember, if you take a trajectory of the newspapers that were published during those years, some of the times you will see headlines, defense for whom and for what. There were, period of 10, 15 years, annually, the largest allocation of our budget goes to defense. So was it infrastructure really that, made us not to invest in human capital, in health, in education, in agriculture? Was it really also the fault of the World Bank that made our economic planners not to give priority allocation to some of these sectors? I think we need to, again, take ourselves back to our own home, like Tilewa said. Charity should and must begin at home. We need to tell ourselves the bitter truth. We were wrong. And we never had a plan. During the First Republic, we had a national development plan. Up to the time when the military came into governance, we had a national development plan that were being rolled. But subsequently, what happened? We were not planning. And like Tlewa said, failure to plan is planning to fail. And I think it is high time that we come back to our senses and begin to imbibe the culture of development planning. Thank God today we have the Vision 2020 plan that we are implementing. We have the National Economic Reconstruction and Growth Plan, and we have other development plan of the federal government. And I do pray that these efforts are sustained and they continue, and as we make some mistakes, we retreat, correct the mistakes, and then move on. Otherwise, we will just continue to sit down and think that someone sitting down in the comfort of his or her office in Washington, D.C., that is where the World Bank is located, they will dictate to us what policies to do and what not to do. If we do that, I think we will be completely a failed state if we're not careful.
Right, Shwaibu Idris, Tilewa Adebajo in Lagos, and Mike Obadan in Benin, and Kenny Faye with us in the Abuja studios. Gentlemen, we are still on, but we'll take a short break now.
Can I see your particulars, sir?
Officer, my particulars no dey here.
In that case, you'll have to come with me to the police station.
Officer, which levels? Where I for find you something make you take arrange your weekend.
What? Offense number 1, driving without particulars. Offense number 2, trying to bribe an officer of the law.
I won't harass Nigerians or take bribe. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
For years, the NTA has been promoting science, technology, arts and crafts under the tagged name National Children's Expo. We are set with another edition as we gather children around Nigeria, junior category ages 6 to 12 and senior category ages 13 to 18. The theme for Expo 2018, achieving self-sufficiency in agriculture, meeting the challenges of security and exposition of alternative energy as pathways to national development. Date, October 21st to 25th, 2018. Venue, NTA Headquarters Arena, Area 11, Garki, Abuja. We are set to celebrate the best of innovation across the country. NTA ETV, promoting learning.
All right. Thank you for staying with us on Good Morning Nigeria. And we still have our guests in Abuja, Lagos, and Benin Network Center. Let's go quickly to Professor Kenny Faye, who is in our Abuja studio. I want us to still toe the line of economic planning model. If we look at Nigeria, we're talking about the caliber of the models we have here. Why are we not considering the issue of human capital development? I mean, it's not rocket science. You don't need the World Bank to tell you about the importance of having an enlightened and educated population.
You are right. In fact, let me even draw you to one example. When the ERPG plan, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, was done, remember there was mention of 4 pillars, their infrastructure, agriculture, industry, and there was nothing else. I think it probably took the intervention of the VP to include social and economic inclusion. So the 5th pillar was actually, so you could see how that human development area was actually, it has to be brought in. I think the key issue, what I find in what has been said by the President of the World Bank, and looking at Nigeria in general, there is a missing word. Sustainable infrastructure, sustainable human development. They can pour money in infrastructure, but if it's not sustainable, you cannot answer questions about debt sustainability. If it is not sustainable, you cannot answer questions of why is PPP not happening, so private sector to drive this. It's just because that word is missing. And they will still pour money on infrastructure and it comes to nothing. Then if you don't do the same on human development, you're going to see money going into education, but you can't find how it will be sustained. You see more money going to pay for primary school in local government, but you still can't see the engine that will drive sustainability of investment in education. And if I give you an example, There is so much, Nigeria, we have over 140 universities, and over half of them are owned by private sector. People still say there are too many universities, but the quality of it is poor. America has 300 million, we are 200 million. But how do you explain 2,600 universities in America? They're not training for Americans, they're training for the whole world. So that is business. University education is a business. You can only come to that when you add sustainability, sustainable investment in education. That's when you can pay attention to that. Then you come to health. You think you cannot make health business? Then go and explain why $1 billion is paid on travel, on tourism, on health, medical tourism. So if we invest sustainably in health, that can create not only a platform for Nigeria, but also the whole of Africa. People will come here to do operations rather than Nigeria go to other countries. So the word missing is sustainable. So that anything you're investing in, look at how it could be sustained. In infrastructure, why is private sector not driving that? PPP. Why is the debt issue still being mentioned? Because there's no debt sustainability approach. So we actually, constitutionally, we have actually come to doing something because the Fiscal Responsibility Act said, okay, you shouldn't be external borrowing, there shouldn't be external borrowing except if it is for capital projects. And put one restriction saying, look, no more than 3% of our deficit to GDP. So that's fine, but they couldn't define the debt ceilings for the others, for domestic and external. But what it hasn't done is to address sustainable infrastructure investment or capital investment, because that would have said, look, wait a minute, yes, you are going to put this on this road, that road. How sustainable is it going to be? So you still find government putting anything called infrastructure on the external borrowing budget, the money of which are not going to be sustainable. They will not be able to pay themselves, repay themselves, and that comes back to debt sustainability. So we need to carry that word. That is the key word. Wherever we are going, no problem, but you must have that key word, but that's what enables the country to regenerate itself.
Now, still staying with you, talking about sustainability, I want to look at the education sector. Now, you just said that education, health, these are all things that you have to get into PPP. For Nigeria at the moment, would you look at the education sector and say that is what we enjoy? Because if you take a look at some of the private universities that are coming up, how many people can afford to go to these private universities? Well,
you are correct. But the thing is, when you subject, the banks, the World Bank, they actually included, very recently, social, economic, and environmental sustainability in the assessment of projects. They have it there. But what I'm saying is, how strong is the case for economic sustainability? Because once that is in there, you have to demonstrate. You are going to borrow money. Why is he going to repay the money? Then you now find out that whether it's education or whether it's health, you have to address the capacity of this project to regenerate itself. And that is the key. Otherwise, and what you say to government, because there are other priorities of government, they may have some rural things they want to do. They can do that. Use your own budget to do all other things that tickle your fancy. But when you have to go out to borrow for this purpose, you have to subject it to sustainability tests, economic sustainability tests.
All right, Professor Ken Ife, thank you very much. I mean, you've raised another very important point, which has to do with sustainability. I'd like to go back to Professor Mike Obada in our Benin Network studios. Professor Mike Obada, from Lagos, two guests, Lewa and Shuaibu, are agreed on charity beginning at home with regard to economic planning. And therefore, for purposes of our economic planning going forward on account of the mea culpa, as you said, from the president of the World Bank, let's play out this scenario. Do we, economic planners, have a sufficient understanding of the interplay of forces around the global financial system? I'm asking this question against the background of what you know very well. When Nigeria was heavily indebted, when we had a debt overhang, the London and Paris clubs, these were private lenders. But the lenders, or the creditors, didn't come directly to us. Instead, they used the instrumentality of the Bretton Woods institution to constrict the policy space. That was when we started hearing that subsidy is uneconomical. Subsidy is not helpful. Remove subsidy from education. When we were in school, we were feeding with 50 kobo a meal. 1 naira 50 kobo a day. So by 1984, by the time we had